This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Evan Jansen. This show, of course, always live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also live on YouTube right now with the whole show. As always, available on demand to watch back later on our YouTube channel. Today we get an update on the financial crisis in Greece after the country defaulted on its IMF loan overnight. Here in South Africa, drought is threatening the sugar industry in KwaZulu-Natal. And we close today with a look at a book called Holy Cows that's causing quite a bit of debate. But first, here's a look at the day's news with Anita Mar.
Good morning, I'm Anita Mar. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. In Lesotho, the situation still seems to be tense this morning. This as SADC facilitator Cyril Ramaphosa is set to meet with the family of the country's former army chief, Ma Paronkwe Mahao. The deputy president will also hold a series of meetings to establish what sparked the fears gripping opposition party leaders in Lesotho. Ramaphosa arrived in the City following concerns of more political instability in the country. Meanwhile, Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula says she cannot yet share the contents of the discussion with Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe. The SADC chair met with President Jacob Zuma's special envoy after reports of concerns of further instability in Lesotho emerge. Mapisa-Nqakula will now proceed to Botswana to brief President Ian Khama, SADC's deputy chair, on the issue.
President Mugabe is chair of SADC and is a veteran leader in the region. Is equally very concerned about what is happening in Lesotho. He is very concerned, for instance, about the death of this Brigadier General.
The bus service PATCO will wait for the court to give guidance on the matter of staff redeployment. The application by PATCO to have a new bus operator take over staff affected by its cancelled contracts is set to continue in the Labour Court in Johannesburg this week. The bus operator says about 330 people will be affected. It wants the Gauteng Transport Department and its new service provider, Autopax, to take over staff. Meanwhile, there have been reports this morning of passengers being left stranded as the Autopax buses failed to show up in Mamelodi, east of Pretoria. The Greek debt crisis has entered a new phase after Athens failed to meet a repayment deadline to the International Monetary Fund. Greece is now cut off from further loans and its international bailout has been suspended. The country failed to make its €1.5 billion loan repayment to the fund hours after Eurozone ministers refused to extend its bailout agreement. It's now the first developed economy to default on a loan with the IMF. And the United States and Cuban governments will later today announce the reopening of embassies in their respective capitals. This is seen as the latest, if not most significant step towards normalizing diplomatic relations after more than 50 years of estrangement. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just follow us. Just search for Newsroom on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janina. Greece has become the first developed economy to default on loans from the International Monetary Fund. The country's deadline expired at midnight after the nation's bailout talks with creditors collapsed. The default sees them join a list of offenders that included Cuba and Zimbabwe. On Monday, tens of thousands of Greeks rallied to back their government's rejection of tough international bailout measures after a clash with foreign lenders that pushed Greece close to the brink. The show of resistance came at the end of the day that started with stunned Greeks waking up to shuttered banks, long supermarket queues and overwhelming uncertainty over their future in the Eurozone. Now, to talk to us today via Skype in Brussels, well, we're joined by James Pack, who is the SABC's European correspondent. Very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
The deadline was missed at midnight. What are the immediate implications?
The immediate implications is that the International Monetary Fund will now register this formally as a default, and it means that Greece is no longer able to access finances from the International Monetary Fund. Now, that's specific just to that fund, but in the wider picture of this, it also now means that the European Central Bank has ended their liquidity, so the money that's been funding the Greek banks over the last few months, which has been desperately needing to keep them afloat, that's now ended, putting the entire Greek banking system into question. So this is quite a serious measure. However, having said that, there was certainly no expectation that this repayment deadline would be made. The Greek finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, he said that they wouldn't be paying this debt. So now what's going to happen is a look at the bailout extension, or potentially a new bailout, and all in preparation for a referendum of the Greek people set for Sunday.
What are the main complaints that Greeks have with the so-called tough measures of this bailout?
The bailout measures that the international creditors want to include a 23% VAT rate. That's relatively high and very, very difficult to allow growth in a country to have such VAT. Also, pension cuts. They want pension reforms to mean that people don't take early retirements, that those on the lowest pensions would lose some of their money. Essentially, there's a very technical and in detailed set, but pension reforms are a big thing. And also primary budget surplus targets. So how much better the Greek government is doing with spending to tax revenue intake. That was a point that was thought to be settled, but now really they're looking at what deals can be done over the taxes and the pensions.
In the case of Zimbabwe in southern Africa in 2001, massive hyperinflation followed. Monetary systems all but collapsed. Do we see this happening with Greece?
Well, that was obviously a specific situation to Zimbabwe. What we're really, that is something that could happen here. But what's really at stake here is a Greek exit from the single currency euro. And if Greece does leave the euro and returns to the drachma, its currency before it entered the bloc in the European Union that uses the euro, it would be incredibly destructive for the Greek economy. But there are many experts that say that within 5 years, if they have their own currency, that they'll be able to build their economy themselves and won't be under such strict measures, with a strong German economy and having to use the same currency as that. So essentially, that might be a big problem for Greece, but something that they could potentially get over. But really what people are worried about is what it means for the rest of the single currency Eurozone. If Greece were to leave, the Eurozone is something that was set up with the intention of no one ever leaving. And if Greece were to leave, then any other country that ran into financial trouble, Cyprus, Italy, Portugal, these countries are still under strict austerity measures from international creditors, not quite as strict as Greece has been, I have to say. But if they ever hit financial trouble, then there would be an option that those countries could leave. And once that happened, it could throw the whole project of the single currency euro into jeopardy.
Is this a humiliating day for the IMF, who some say should have foreseen this and implemented real structural economic reforms as long as 5 years ago in Greece?
Well, it's a difficult day for the IMF for certain. I don't know about humiliating, because they were very aware of this, and it's something that's been coming. But it's certainly a difficult day for them. They're not going to have a major economy, a developed economy, defaulting on their debt. Certainly doesn't look good. And also, in these negotiations, the IMF Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, has certainly been considered to be the hardest on Greece and to be the toughest in these negotiations. But having said that, she has a different set of priorities. The IMF has many developing countries across Africa, countries like Zimbabwe, to care about. And Greece's debts are comparable to those debts in many other countries across Latin America, Africa, etc. Whereas the European creditors side of things, they're the ones that really have to be concerned about Greece. They're the ones that are in the euro. They're the ones that are in the European Union with Greece. So there's a different set of priorities. But it certainly is a difficult day for the IMF.
Do we see Greece going back to its own currency in the short term?
There is certainly a possibility. The Greek people will be having a referendum on Sunday on whether to accept the bailout terms, the austerity measures put forward by the international creditors. Now, if they say no to those terms, it could be a matter of weeks before they go back to the drachma. Really, the point when we'll know that is when Greece must repay 3.5 billion euro to the European Central Bank in around 3 weeks' time. If they default on that debt, the European Central Bank is the central bank of the euro, and it pins up many of the economies, and it's the main lending institution. Defaulting on that debt is going to be catastrophic, and if they do that, we could see them go back to the drachma almost immediately. It would be a technical default and would mean that they had to go back to their own currency.
Thank you very much for that contribution. That's Jack Parakat, our European Union correspondent, giving us an update on this developing crisis in Greece. Yes, the country failed to make its loan repayments to the International Monetary Fund overnight, hours after Eurozone ministers refused to extend its bailout agreement. Here are some of the comments that have been flying around on social media. Sines Loshin says the IMF is making an example of Greece. It's showing that it will crush democracy and socialism. The Greek government is putting up a brave fight. Leon Marinkovic says, I don't understand people who support Greece crisis. Really, Leon? Isa Suarez says, I expect more twists and turns as the Greek saga continues today. Eurogroup to meet to discuss Greece requests for a third bailout. Nico Zinzeling says, there must be repercussions for EU bureaucrats and politicians as well as bankers responsible for irresponsible loans. Yes, that's at the heart of it. Real economic reforms that were supposed to be implemented. Sonia Randava says IMF and Euro bankers impose 66 euros per day until 6th July as hidden ritual celebrating coming Greek apocalypse or burnt offering. She's talking about the crisis there. Now, developing story here in South Africa, there is a tense standoff between taxi operators and Autopax bus drivers at the Mamelodi bus terminus east of Pretoria, where the new bus operators are being prevented from ferrying commuters. Autopax has taken over some Gauteng routes which were previously operated by Patco. Patco terminated their services, saying the government subsidy was non-profitable. Police have been deployed to monitor the situation. Our very own reporter, Patricia Fasahi, joins us from Mamelodi. She's with a guest from the Mamelodi Taxi Solution Committee. A very good morning to you, Patricia. Before you carry on with your interview, please just set the scene for us.
Well, good morning, Eben. Well, even as you have already mentioned, a standoff here at the Mamelodi East Patco depot. A lot of taxi drivers, taxi owners have been converging here since very early this morning. You would know that, of course, as from today, the new bus company is supposed to take over from the Patco bus system that has terminated its services in the area. And it seems like there is some grievances from the local taxi operators. There were some promises made to them that were not honoured, and as a result, they have blockaded the bus depot entrance, not allowing the new buses to go out. They want their demands to be met. They want the promises that were met, that were made apparently by the Department of Transport and, of course, some of the other transport associates. They want those demands to be met. But right now, I am going to be joined by one of the taxi association members in the area, and it's Mzamo Dube, who will tell us more about what exactly their grievances are. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the SABC News.
Morning to you.
If you can just take us through exactly why you gathered here, what are your grievances?
First and foremost, I would like to say we've gathered here not on a violent nature, but clearly seeking answers. Because we've been working on this for the past 2 months. To know that Patco was leaving yesterday, we've known that for the past 3 months, if not 4 months. And we've been having workshops and doing ticket systems. Look, we have inducted ourselves in this subsidy thing. And we've been advised by government and other stakeholders that this is viable for us. And suddenly there comes city to city without an explanation. And look, even day before yesterday, we've been working on some documents. So it's very puzzling to us.
If you can just make it very clear for us, what exactly was the promise or the agreement that you have reached with the Department of Transport?
Look, for all that we know is that Patco was leaving because of the subsidy was not enough to cover a bus. But converting that subsidy to a taxi, it made sense. Hence, we took that route, and we were advised on that route. We have worked day and night on this matter. So I fail to understand how can we be inducted on something and yet at the end of the day with the premise of that we'll be operating it. And now then comes somebody else. And without any notice, without any... Look, we never know or we never knew that PRASA or Autopex is our competitor. We never knew that. But for what we knew, PRASA doesn't have 16-seaters.
Okay. Did you sign a valid agreement with the department?
What we have, or what I can tell you, the processes that we took, we wouldn't have taken those processes and with them paying for them, see, without having a premise that we are going, because this was like, this is an empowerment for taxi people. Since the industry has been deprived by the previously government of apartheid and so forth. So 21 years after, you're still seeing the very same taxi doing the very same thing without any transformation. I mean, you've got to have to ask yourself why.
Okay. Now, you're talking about the subsidy. Do you know more or less how much was going to be injected into the local taxi industry?
Well, we had our financial advisors working on that, and they were going to come up because we've got various models that they've presented to us. And yet, as I'm saying, that the process was still ongoing, and our members have been informed. So now when you inform people about something, and you have officials coming to endorse that, you are raising hopes. And when hopes are raised and when they are not met, what happened?
Okay.
This is what happened because we want clarity, we want answers.
Okay, now you have made it very clear since very early this morning that none of the new buses will operate in the streets of Mamelodi until your demands are met. You are now moving to the park down the road. What exactly will you be discussing when you get there?
Well, I think for now we still going to have to wait for our colleagues. We're having a meeting with the mayor, and we'll get our feedback there. So I think for now is to see how do we disperse and how do we regroup again in order to get our information moving forward. Okay,
just lastly, you did mention earlier that there are certain instructions or communique that you have given your members to, to converge to the mayor. What exactly did you ask your members to tell the mayor or demand from the mayor?
Well, I got a call from one of my colleagues that we were being requested. So I don't think it's us going to ask for something, but we are there with an ear as to, since we're in the dark. So we will wait for them to come and inform us how did it go.
One of the biggest concerns is violence. You do know that, the history associated with the taxi industry in our country. People are scared that this thing might turn out violent. Is there any guarantee that you will keep it peaceful?
Since it hasn't been violence from early in the morning, we don't see no need for that. I think as a society we have went past it, and what we need is an understanding, because believe me, we've been on board from the inception of this thing. So I don't see how violence can fit in there other than clarities.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mzamo Dube. Of course, that comes from the local taxi solution committee, just giving us what they are here for. And of course, as they have mentioned earlier, a certain agreement that has been made with the Department of Transport, and it has not been honored. And hence they are here. They want answers. They want to know why the Department of Transport, why government is not keeping its promise that the local taxi industry should be taking over the Patco routes and the Patco bus depot, and obviously the money that Patco used to get from government would now be injected to the local taxi industry as part of an empowerment instrument. We will be coming to you again later. As I have mentioned earlier, the taxi people that are gathered here are moving just down the road, where they will be having a meeting to decide what is the way forward.
Thank you very much, Patricia Fisaki, coming to you live from Mamelodi, east of Pretoria, on that developing story around unhappiness around transport in the capital. Let's move on with the show here at Newsroom. Let's take a look at our pick of the day. This one comes from Daily News, captioned, Eurozone ministers to weigh latest proposal from Greece as the country defaults on its IMF payment. It says that Greece, my birthplace, Europe, my homeland. Moving on with the front pages from around the globe. We start in China. The South China Morning Post reports here that more than 100 people were found dead after a military transport plane plowed into a residential area shortly after takeoff in northern Indonesia yesterday, in what may be the deadliest accident yet for an air force with a long history of crashes. We move to New York, where the Wall Street Journal reports that Greece became the first advanced economy to default on loans from the IMF despite Athens' last-minute push for emergency aid. And we stay in the US, where the USA Today reports in the wake of the church shootings in Charleston, the nation is split on whether the Confederate flag is a racist symbol that should be removed from public spaces. That's according to a Suffolk University poll. Now for a look at what's happening around South Africa today. We start in Bloemfontein, where the Cuban Five are expected to arrive in the area as part of their tour around the country. They will attend lectures on Nelson Mandela and Fidel Castro at Central University of Technology this evening. Then in KwaZulu-Natal, Zambelo Wildlife will receive equipment worth millions of rands to help fight rhino poaching in the province there. The new equipment includes a number of items such as portable X-ray machines, metal detectors, camera and night vision goggles. Meanwhile, in Cape Town, the largest airline in Africa, Ethiopian Airlines, will today embark on its inaugural flight to Cape Town. That's the good news. Time for us to take a short break. This is Newsroom here on SABC News.
Oh, hi. Just brushing up on my party. We are going to make it number 12. Official. Let me teach you a quick word.
Yeah.
Kwaito star. A woman who has mastered the art of dancing in high heels. It's up and
warm up the dance floor with a bottle of Sedgwick's original Old Brown for only $24.99 and help make party South Africa's 12th official language. Tops at Spa. Shake things up.
Hello and welcome to your world on SABC News Channel 404. I'm Tabile Ngwato.
And I'm Lulu Gabu.
President Uhuru Kenyatta says he will attend the Status Conference for his Crimes Against Humanity case, but in his personal capacity and not as President of Kenya.
Judges insist he attends this status conference.
About 50 Kenyan MPs are expected to travel to The Hague to express solidarity with President Kenyatta.
The Kenya cases have really tested the International Criminal Court in ways that it hasn't yet been tested.
Your World, weekdays at 9 p.m.
Welcome back. With the latest increase in the fuel price, transport costs could go up as well as food prices. Consumers could once more be forced to dig deep in their pockets. The continued dry spell in KwaZulu-Natal, well, has now been widely felt by farmers in that region. More than 80% of the country's sugarcane is grown in KwaZulu-Natal, but this year farmers are expecting a decrease of at least 20% in crushed cane. Earlier this year, Illovo Sugar, the country's second biggest producer of the sweetener by market value, closed Umzimkhulu mill for the 2015 sugar milling season because the poor weather has affected cane supplies. Now, from our studios in Durban, we are joined by Nhlanhla Gomede, the Managing Director of South Africa's Cane Growers Association. Very good morning, Mr. Gomede. I thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Tell us, how dire is the situation there, Mr. Gomede?
Well, the situation is pretty bad. And I think the issue here is that if you look at the human side of it, because unfortunately drought does not just take the form of the impact on farmers, but it tends to impact the people on the ground. It also impacts, I guess, the employees of the people that are employed in the industry, as well as the businesses, which businesses include the farmers as well as all of the other supporting businesses. As we speak right now, in most of the communities are actually facing water load shedding, if you like, where in some parts, especially in the North Coast, the Ilembe district in particular, for instance, is facing water cuts between 9 and 4 in the afternoon. So that affects the people and the communities which live around those areas. However, the biggest problem really is actually on the income side, both for the farmers as well as for the laborers. It's a seriously difficult situation.
Alternative sources of water, Mr. Gomede, is it being explored? Are there?
Well, let's put it this way. If you look at the human tragedy only in terms of the supply of water, perhaps you can look at alternative sources thereof. But if you look at the issue of the utilization of land, of businesses that are operating on that land, there's got to be a far better solution that is being formulated. But yes, therefore there would be issues around, because the thing is that the problem with the working land is that droughts do come. You have floods sometimes, you've got frost sometimes, and you've got drought sometimes. The issue is about, and I guess with climate change, we're going to see a lot more of this. But the question is, what are the long-term solutions? You need to still make sure that the people in those areas are employed. You need to see that the land is utilized. You need to see that the farmers that are operating those lands are profitable so that they continue to run the businesses. And you need to be able to make sure that in the good years, I guess, you save something for the bad years. And I think we just, as an industry and as a people, we need to find solutions, long-term solutions, not just relating to the supply of water, but relating to the types of crops we keep, coming up with innovative funding mechanisms that will ensure that the cash flow solution, the cash flow problems that are currently faced by the businesses can be prevented or can be solved. There's a whole lot of host of solutions that are required to actually solve this problem.
What about looking elsewhere, looking overseas? In places like California, they have had drought for most of the last decade, but they still have productivity of more than 85% there.
Well, let's put it this way. There are solutions which are cheap solutions, sustainable solutions, and some of them are very expensive solutions. But I'm not sure whether in South Africa, for instance, we've looked at issues of water harvesting during the good years. Yes, there would be the issues of, or there are probabilities, I guess, in South Africa for, especially in a place like Durban, for desalination of water, because we are, after all, sitting next to vast amounts of water, which is the sea, next to us. However, they tend to be very expensive solutions, which are good for particular type industries. But if you look at our industry, in particular the cane growing industry or the sugar industry, which is in total a 12 billion rands industry employing 57,000 people, if you look at that 12 billion, the question you would have to ask is that would that industry be able to survive or would be able to sustain desalinized water? What would be the impact? What would be the impact of the cost thereof? There must be other solutions. I mean, if I've worked in places like Botswana, for instance, where you see these JoJo tanks everywhere. People harvest water. But I guess we in South Africa still need to learn that there are those solutions.
Quickly, finally, sir, the cost of sugar and other sugar-related products, do you expect that to go up? And are we going to see imports?
Well, how the industry actually functions is that we tend to carry in, at the end of the season, we tend to carry in a lot of sugar into the next season. And of course, at the end of the season, we carry out some sugar. Yes, we tend again also to produce a bit more than we need. For instance, you would find that our market could be, in terms of sugar, 1.7 million, but we'll probably be producing in the tune of 1.8 or 2 million tons of sugar, which generally is exported. So although we're looking this year at a reduction of something like 23%, which is a quarter of the output, which will impact on the farmers badly, but in terms of the consumers, that shouldn't really impact on the consumers at all. All that we'll need to do is just basically reduce the amount of sugar that is exported.
Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Gumede. That's Nhlanhla Gumede, who's the Managing Director of the Cane Growers Association of South Africa, alarming us that, well, we're having issues with drought there and that production is 20% down. Could get worse. Now, let's take a look at our tweet of the day. It comes from Ndegwa Hasana saying, Happy Independence Day, Rwanda, Burundi, and Somalia. Although the word independence is being controversial in this regard. That's our viewer tweet of the day. Now, let's take a look at what's happening on our Newsroom Facebook page. A young boy has been rescued from an initiation school in the Eastern Cape, while 6 have died already, just 2 months into the winter season. Over 60 boys have been admitted to hospitals in the province. Then the Southern African Development Community Chair and Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe have met with President Jacob Zuma's special envoy over concerns of further instability in Lesotho. And President Barack Obama will announce the re-establishment of diplomatic ties with Cuba after more than 50 years of animosity stemming from the Cold War era. Now, for more news and updates on all of these stories and a whole lot more, go to the search bar on Facebook, type in SABC Newsroom. Our page will come up. Like that page, and you'll get all the latest news updates all the time. Time for us to take a break. This is Newsroom on SABC News.
Hello and welcome to Your World on SABC News Channel 404. I'm Tabile Ngwato.
And I'm Lulu Gabu.
President Uhuru Kenyatta says he will attend the status conference for his crimes against humanity case, but in his personal capacity and not as president of Kenya.
Judges insist he attends this status conference.
About 50 Kenyan MPs are expected to travel to The Hague to express solidarity with President Kenyatta.
The Kenya cases have really tested the International Criminal Court in ways that it hasn't yet been tested.
Your World, weekdays at 9 p.m.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just take a look at the stories making headlines today. In Lesotho, the situation still seems to be tense this morning. This as SADC facilitator Cyril Ramaphosa is set to meet with the family of the country's former army chief. The deputy president will also hold a series of meetings to establish what sparked the fears gripping opposition party leaders in Lesotho. There is a tense standoff between taxi operators and Autopax bus drivers at the Mamelodi bus terminus east of Pretoria this morning. New bus operators are being prevented from transporting commuters in the area. Autopax has taken over some Gauteng routes which were previously operated by Putco. Putco terminated their service, saying the government subsidy was non-profitable. Police have been deployed to monitor the situation. And the Greek debt crisis has entered a new phase after Athens failed to meet a repayment deadline to the International Monetary Fund. Greece is now cut off from further loans and its international bailout has been suspended. The country failed to make its €1.5 billion loan repayment to the fund hours after Eurozone ministers refused to extend its bailout agreement. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janina. Now, the Kagiso Shanduka Trust, in conjunction with the Free State Department of Education, will be hosting the inaugural Back-to-School Party fundraising dinner in Bloemfontein. The fundraising party will be hosted by the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, Free State Premier, Ace Magashule, Free State MEC for Education, Tate Magwe, and the Kagiso Trust Chairman, Reverend Frank Chikane. The aim is to raise funds in support of the Free State Schooling Improvement Project. The project, established 2 years ago, have already supported educational transformation in 428 schools in the Fezile Dabi and Moteo districts. Now, District Manager from the Kagiso Shanduka Trust, Rodney Makube, joins us in our Bloemfontein studio to tell us a little bit more about this project and the function that will be held tonight, I'm told. Very good morning to you, Rodney. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Tell us about this development project and how the fundraising dinner then fits into this.
All right. I think you have already mentioned that the fundraising dinner will be held in Bloemfontein at Emoya Estate on the 2nd, which is tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And as you have already also mentioned that the dinner is, or the whole function is actually organized in order to support the objectives of Kagiso Shanduka in collaboration with Department of Education in the two districts, which is Fezile Dabi District and Moteo. And in Moteo, we are looking at Tabanchu, Botshabelo, and Mansopa and Naledi municipalities.
Now, you started 2 years ago, and so far you've pledged just over 400 million South African rand. How do you view this, and how are you going to make this bigger?
Look, we have started in the 2 years, and as you have rightfully mentioned, that the aim is to reach 428 schools in the two districts that you have mentioned. And obviously, in our endeavors, we want to address issues relating to infrastructure. We want to address issues relating to curriculum support in our schools. We want to address issues relating to eyesight testing and provision of spectacles for our primary school learners. And so far in our endeavors, we have made sure that we cover infrastructural development in about 64 projects, 64 schools. And we have made sure that about 18,000 learners get tested, and more than 500 of them are given spectacles. So we have also made sure that about 1,800 educators attend training in mathematics, in physical science, in accounting, also in English for your GET, and English and Maths for your foundation and intermediate phase. So one of the objectives of this fundraising dinner is to make sure that we involve private sector, other companies who have the like-mindedness that we have as Kaiso Shanduka, other companies who have the same appetite that we have in terms of improving the standard of education in our country. So the aim is to make sure that we attract more partners in order to ultimately raise more money to top up on the amount that you have mentioned.
You say the aim is to also to improve learner performance in schools. Tell us about the impact that you're having on the learning side of matters.
All right. What we are doing is we have developed a change theory as Kaiso Shanduka Trust, obviously in collaboration with the Department of Education. And in this change theory, we believe that if we support and assist and work together with our educators who are doing a great work, by the way, if we support them, ultimately the same support, the same empowerment we're giving them, it must cascade down to learners in order for us to improve that performance. And in terms of the impact that you have made so far, last year we have said to primary schools and secondary schools, the department have set a target of about 90% for performance for secondary schools for their grade 12. And in terms of honor for primary schools, that 60% of learners should perform above 50 in their mathematics and English for honor. And we have seen increase in the number of schools who are performing above 90. We are seeing increase in terms of the number of schools, primary schools, who are performing above 60 and 50 in terms of their honor. In terms of the cultures in the school, in terms of commitment that we are seeing in our schools, that tells us that there is a change that is happening. In terms of the hunger that is developing, where you've got schools saying, we need that support in our schools, we need that curriculum support, or we need you to come and assist us in terms of transformation workshops. That says to us there is a change toward the right direction. That says to us there is a hunger to transform education in Free State.
Rodney, thank you for joining us today. That's Rodney Makube, who is a district manager from the Kaiso Shanduka Trust. They're hosting an education fundraising dinner there tomorrow evening to improve conditions of education in that part of the country. Now, we live in a country with multiple races, language and culture, a society in which modernity and tradition live side by side after 21 years of democracy. In his book, Holy Cows, South African columnist Gareth van Onselen talks about the ambiguities of being a South African, living with third world realities but aspiring to first world standards, being politically correct and avoiding the uncomfortable issues facing our nation. Holy Cows is rich with stories that every South African can really relate to, from Twitter wars between politicians, initiation ceremonies, and simply becoming a nation that far too often ignores the things that need to be spoken about the most. Now, joining us from Cape Town today is Gareth himself to talk about this and South Africa in general. Very good morning to you, Gareth. Thank you for joining us.
How's it, Eben? Thanks very much for having me.
Very good. Great book. You bring up a number of issues that South Africans face but refuse to talk about. Tell us, which are the holy cows that you see stand out the most day to day?
Right. Well, the title of the book, Holy Cows, is an allusion to culture, which I argue is the ultimate holy cow. South Africa is a very diverse society with a wide range of cultural beliefs and practices, and a lot of these don't enjoy critical interrogation. We do talk about a lot of them, but usually just to affirm them as being right and good. But very rarely do we look at them critically and ask what the problems are with them. And a number of the essays in the book tackle some of these subjects.
Is it our duty to interrogate culture?
Yes, I think it's everyone's duty, or any informed citizen's duty, or someone who has an interest in the society they live in, to question the kinds of practices and beliefs that determine a society and its makeup, usually with a view to determining what is best practice and what is damaging or detrimental, but also just for insightful purposes, to better understand who we are and how we operate as a society.
Motivation behind writing this book, Gareth? What was your personal motivation when you sat down to write about these issues?
Well, look, culture's always been a great interest of mine. I'm very interested in cultural practices and beliefs and what they say about people and how they come into being, how they operate, the consequences of them. So that was always one motivating factor for me. Another one was that I just had a couple of stories to tell. Not every essay in the book is a critical, objective review. There are some first-hand stories, there's some second-hand stories. I do one about how Nelson Mandela's Christmas party slowly deteriorated over the years, which is actually quite melancholic. Other them are quite funny, how services such as Vodacom tend to disappoint more than leave you feeling satisfied.
What are some of the Twitter wars that you got in the books? What are some of those ones that are standing out?
Well, the one essay, or two essays in the book are a form of biography of former DA leader Helen Zille, who was a voracious tweeter. And Twitter is a new phenomenon, and not many people have ever thought to look at a series of tweets from an individual over a period of time and see what they say about that person and their convictions, because Twitter, in its brevity and its immediacy, forces people to be much more authentic than they do in, say, speeches or statements. And by looking at all those tweets together over time, she's tweeted about 37,000 of them, you can start to build some idea as to what her convictions are and who she is. Included in there are, of course, a great many tours.
21 years on, South Africa of today, are we more tolerant society? And are we more accepting of one another and one's traditions and culture, if one can call it that?
I think South Africa is very binary in that respect. In some regards, we are a hugely tolerant society. In fact, we're a flag bearer for tolerance in the world in some regards. Certainly the establishment of a new democracy is a great tribute to South Africa's tolerance and what we're willing to put up with. But on the other hand, we have this sort of binary nature where we're massively intolerant. We are hugely judgmental. We moralize about our contemporaries, very often in very vicious terms. So both these things seem to coexist. What the book argues is that when it comes to culture and certain cultural practices, critical interrogation never really seems to happen. And that is a blind spot that I'm trying to look into in the book.
Do we complain too much?
I don't think we complain any more or less than anyone else. I think the level of debate in South Africa is a bit superficial, so the kinds of complaints we put forward are sometimes a bit vacuous. But certainly as far as the amount goes, I think we're pretty much up there with everyone else.
That's nice to hear that from such an informed man. Wrote a great book called Holy Cows. Go and read it. Gareth van Onselen came to us live from Cape Town to give us, insights into a book around the very sensitive topics, culture being one of them. Now, before we go, President Pierre Nkurunziza claims an early victory for his ruling CNDD-FDD party in Burundi, despite the opposition of domestic civic groups, AU and the UN. Of course, lots of other parties are not even taking part in that election there. But yeah, some of your comments before we go. Gracchus says, on behalf of the people of Catalonia, I congratulate the people of Burundi as you celebrate the 53rd anniversary of your independence. Of course, that is the case. Evelyn Tremble says, Bujumbura noted sporadic gunfire and grenade explosions in some areas of Bujumbura there, as many are not happy about the election. Florent Nduwayo says, Burundi is taken hostage. Something needs to be done. And there you have a picture, lovely picture that is, of a mother doing her duties. Alfredo Zamudio says, what must happen for refugees and internally displaced to return? Talking about the sporadic fighting there, the victims of the fighting there. Of course, the president, Pierre Nkurunziza, is, he is going to stand for a third term, it seems. That's what he says, at least, having claimed an early victory there. Time for us to wrap it up here. Of course, SABC, this show is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. We come to you every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. You can watch the show back on our YouTube. You can watch it live on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.